Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's operator meeting. My name is Hannah Hickam, and I will be your host. And we will get started with Form 3 updates, and that is Chris Eisinger.
Good morning, and thank you, Hannah. I just have a couple very quick announcements about the Form 3. If you can allow me to share my screen real quickly, Hannah. So the first announcement is just as far as just a small little thing that has tripped up people a little bit is with regards to Form 3 submissions. We've gotten several inquiries with people having issues trying to submit and getting errors. And one of the things that isn't as clear as it could be is that when you are finished and ready to submit your form, you've prepared everything, on the signature and certification tab of Form 3, you will see this button for review form. You need to select that and scan through your form first before you actually submit the form. So you have to do that step in order for the form to allow you to submit. So that was one thing that wasn't particularly obvious that we've had to provide some support to folks for. So the other piece of information regarding the Form 3 is just simply that for document management, if you have multiple Form 3s, you can have multiple Form 3s in draft. That is perfectly fine. And when you are actually have submitted one, it's good practice to delete the others just so you don't have all these extra forms in there. In the case of in process, it is possible to submit more than one Form 3. And if in fact you've done that, and that's the case, you need to pick one. And generally we're going to go with the one that's most recently dated. But if you should have see in your particular operator number that you have more than one Form 3 in process, reach out to us and we can push one back to draft so that you can then delete and remove that. So that's really all I had about the Form 3 updates. Thank you to all the operators who have reached out to us recently. We have a big backlog of support to get back to, and we'll try to do that as fast as we can. Scott, do you have anything to add at this point about Form 3 processes? Okay, he does not. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have on this call, or if you want to try to reach out through email or phone calls. Thanks, Hannah. That's all I've got.
Great, thank you, Chris. Next up, we have Elise Devine, who will be going over the flow line layer on the interactive map. Elise, you can take it away.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Hannah, can I share my screen, please? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Can everyone see my presentation?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, perfect. So I won't take a lot of your time this morning. I just wanted to highlight some of the changes that we have made to the flow line layer. First, before I jump into it, I just want to make it clear that we only include GIS data from approved forms. So if your form is in review status right now and it has GIS data attached, you will not be able to see it until we approve the form. Also want to make note that per our rule, we're only able to allow the flow lines to be visible at zoom ratios greater than 1 to 6,000. So if you try to zoom in any closer, the lines will disappear. And I just included just a link to the interactive map for reference. But prior to now, we used to group the flow lines per flow line type. So all of the application flow lines, regardless of the status or fluid type, were basically bunched together. Same goes for the crude oil and produced water lines. But we wanted to make it a lot easier for operators and the public to know what kind of fluid is being transported. So similar to the national pipeline mapping system, we decided to categorize the flow lines by fluid type. So regardless of whether it is an off-location flow line or a crude oil transfer line, it will fit into one of these categories as shown. And I'll dive into how we grouped them, and I'll also talk a bit about the unknown fluid type. And I just want to reiterate that because gas gathering systems are regulated by Colorado Public Utilities Commission. We chose to leave that as a separate layer. I also want to note that prior to January 15, 2021, operators were not required to submit GIS data upon registration of gas gathering systems. So post January 15th, we're requiring operators to submit GIS data for their new systems. However, if you have an existing system or an older system and you have GIS data for it, we do welcome it. We just ask that you consult our GIS guidance for the requirements for how the attributes are to be set up. So, as I said earlier, we're now grouping our flow lines based on fluid type. At this point in time, operators can specify whatever kind of fluid types that they have. There's no standardized list of fluid types, so we basically took the many variations and grouped them accordingly. So if you specified your fluid type as wellbore fluids, produced fluids, mixed phase, or anything of the sort, it falls into multi-phase category. If you grouped your produced water, PW, water, salt water, something that denotes that it's just single phase liquid, crude oil, condensate, then it falls into that category. And we also did take account the different ways that things were spelled for the most part. And we also did the same for gas. So air, vents, supply, natural gas. So those are our categories. So when you go to the interactive map layer and you go to layers and you go down to flow line fluid type, if you toggle that layer on, all of the sub layers will default on as well. So you'll be able to see in the field, okay, I'm working with a gas gathering line here. I'm not sure if you see my cursor. I hope you do, but there's red lines, black lines are the multi-phase, orange lines are the gas lines. And when you hover over a particular flow line, per our rule, you'll be able to see the operator of that line, the fluid type, material type, the diameter. You'll also see the status of the line and the associated form that the GIS data came with. And if you were to double click that line, it will actually open a PDF of that flow line. One thing I do want to highlight is that we have some unknown fluid types. Now, there's a number of reasons why this could happen. As I mentioned earlier, we included the many variations that you can say crude oil, but if it was grossly misspelled, then it falls into an unknown category. And we had some examples of this where it just didn't fit our query, so it ended up as an unknown fluid type. Also, there are instances where the fluid type attribute wasn't set according to our COGCC requirements, which resulted in a null value in our database, which results in an unknown fluid type. Another thing that may happen is an operator may accidentally have said that the fluid type was carbon steel, which of course that doesn't fit into our categories either. So that's the result as well. Now, if you're looking at your data, one thing I do want to note is that for produced water systems and crude oil transfer lines, we require isolation valves. And if you did not assign a fluid type to that particular isolation valve, it will show up pink. But don't worry, if anything's amiss in your data set, if anything is incorrectly classified, that can be fixed. All we need you to do is to submit a Form 44 realignment report for those flow line systems, application flow lines, crude oil transfer lines, produced water transfer systems, or a Form 12 annual updates report for the PUC regulated gas gathering lines. And that's how we can correct those issues. If there's anything else, if there appear to be flow lines that are missing or segments that are missing, please contact the integrity group and we can work something out to get that data into our system. And that is all I have. I'll be staying on to take any questions at the end.
Great, thank you, Elise. And yes, folks, if you've got questions, please drop them in the chat and we will get to those at the end. Next up, we've got a well status and the Form 2A, and that will be Misty Mason. And Misty, just give me a moment to queue up your presentation.
Thank you, Hannah.
All right, got a glare on my screen. All right, go ahead, Misty.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, as Hannah said, my name is Misty Mason, and I am a permit and completion specialist in the permitting and planning group. Next slide, please, Hannah. There are, so some of these slides probably will look familiar. Actually, can you back up one? I think we skipped. Yeah, there we go. Some of these slides, some of the images will look similar to something you've seen before, and I'm just recycling some information. So I wanted to remind everybody that there are 3 categories of information that are assigned to a well now. That's well classification, and you can think of that as what is the well used for and what kind of well is it, such as oil wells, gas storage wells, stratigraphic wells, etc. The second is well status, and you can think of that as what is the physical or operational condition of the well, and that's producing, shut in, temporarily abandoned, those statuses. And then well designation, and you can think of that as what is the functionality or utility of the well, and if it's useful or profitable or beneficial. What we want to, I guess, strike home is that well status does not equal well designation. So try to not get those confused. Next slide, Hannah. So these are a list of well classification codes and well status codes and well designation codes. If a well has been designated out of service on a Form 6A, that does not necessarily mean that the well spot or slot, as we like to call it, is plugged. A Form 6 subsequent reporting the abandonment process is required. For the designation descriptions, you'll see in the blue box, there's an I in the upper right corner above the date. And if you click on that, it'll show you a pop out of what each thing means, but it's probably in your best interest to also check the 100 series rules to make sure that those have not changed, because we may update the rules and not update the pop out. So yeah, out of service well, that is not the same as plugging a well. Once the well is plugged, it will show up in the well designation as reported plugged. And next slide, Hannah. If you find any inaccurate well classification, the way that we would like you to fix it is to submit a Form 4 sundry to correct it. And there's instructions on how to do that in the well classification changes from the October 25th, 2022 operator meeting. So refer to that if you need instructions on how to do that. And next slide, please, Hannah. When adding wells to a location, there are 2 major things you want to look at. First is the Form 2A, and you'll see in this example, there's 17 wells that I've highlighted in this Form 2A. According to the order, there's also a limit to the wells that are allowed, and that's 17 wells. Sometimes those numbers may differ. There may be less wells that are less wells that are allowed under the Form 2A, but there should never be more than what is allowed under the spacing order. If you need to add more wells to the Form 2A, with our OGDP process now, that will be required if you're amending the Form 2A. Next slide, please, Hannah. The following 2 slides, I have examples for you that include different scenarios. This first one has 5 wells on the location or on the pad. The operator wants to add 2 wells, but the Form 2A can only allow, or the Form 2A only allows for 5 wells, and the spacing unit allows for 6. The operator has 3 different options to add these 2 new wells to the location. And that is the first one. The operator can amend the Form 2A and spacing unit to allow for 7 wells. And they will receive 2 new APDs once the spacing unit, Form 2A, and OGDP are approved. That's important that you realize that there is going to be an OGDP required. The scenario 2 is the operator can amend the Form 2A to allow for 6 wells, receive an approved OGDP, and then will receive 1 new APD. But in order to receive that second APD that they're requesting, the operator must plug and abandon 1 existing well. Scenario 3 is the operator does not need to amend the Form 2A, does not need to amend the spacing unit, does not need to do an OGDP. And what they do need to do is they will need to plug 2 of the existing wells, plug and abandon 2 of the existing wells, and then they'll get 2 new APDs. And I have some math there on the right-hand side of the well spots that hopefully can help you figure that out. All right, next slide, please, Hannah. And sorry, I have a cat. She's being crazy. So this location currently has 2 wells on this location. We consider that to be, I'm sorry. Yeah, 2 wells on this location. The one at the top, we consider that to be plugged and no longer takes a well spot or a slot anymore. The Form 2A allows for 3 wells, and its spacing unit allows for 5 wells. The operator in this instance wants to add 3 new wells. And what the operator needs to do is amend the Form 2A to allow for 5 wells and receive an approved OGDP. Then, since the current spacing allows for 5 wells, there's nothing that they need to do to amend. They don't need to amend that. And then the operator, once they receive their 2A and their OGDP, they can file 3 new APDs. And again, the math on the right-hand side. So we have 2 existing, 3 are new that the operator wants, equals 5 total on the pad. And next slide, please, Hannah. And this is just a kind of a reminder that if the Form 2A was approved with COAs pertaining to plugging wells, those wells must be plugged before additional wells can be added to the pad. This means that those wells must be plugged and have a Form 6 subsequent in process. A Form 42 field notice of completion of Form 2A permit conditions should be submitted concurrently. We will not be putting COAs on Form 2s to get them approved before the Form 2A COA is satisfied. And Form 2 can and should be submitted after the Form 42 and Form 6 subsequent have been submitted. And next slide, please, Hannah. I think that's it. Yes. If you have any questions, stay on till the end, type them now, and we'll get those questions answered at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Misty. Next up, we've got OGDP locations, hearing application template, and interwell setbacks. And presenting that will be Stephen Shores. Just give me a moment to queue that one up. Yeah, this one. All right, I think I got the right one. Oh,
Perfect. Thank you, Hannah. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Schwarz, hearing liaison here at COGCC. I'm the intra-agency liaison, primarily working between the hearings unit and the planning and permitting unit, as well as the other technical teams, the rest of the agency. Today, I'm going to be talking about some slight changes to different facets of the OGDP application, more towards the hearing side of things, but also updates to the hearing template and some interval setback language. Next slide, please, Hannah. All right, so with regards to OGDP applications, we're changing slightly how we include versus exclude certain locations within an OGDP. That'll be the bulk of my presentation today. Also gonna highlight the update to the OGDP hearing application template, and again, speak to some of the updated language we're seeking for spacing applications that we've seen and worked through primarily on a lot of the OGDP applications. Next slide, please, Hannah. All right, so the OGDP applications. In 2021, the OGDP rules went into effect, and this was very much the building the plane as we're flying it stage. We had very few OGDPs run through the system, and we were very much in the early stages of getting the guidance out for that. In 2022, this was more the implementation stage of those OGDP rules. We had significantly more OGDPs go through the system, and as we got to see more of the variety and the various types of OGDPs move through, we got a lot of learnings from that. And that leads us to today in 2023, where we're going to start to apply some of these learnings from the OGDP process. And we've identified certain opportunities for process improvement and new efficiencies in the OGDP process. I will be speaking to some of that, and then Planning and Permitting Manager Sabrina Trask will be speaking to additional efficiencies in her presentation a little later on. Next slide, please, Hannah. So with regards to what locations are included or excluded in OGDPs, in the past, we've been fairly consistent with a dual philosophy of what are the activities being proposed? These were the submitted 2As. These were the existing locations that were being used as remote production facilities. And then the second piece was, what are the minerals being produced? And it was this minerals question that led to a lot of existing locations producing the same spacing unit being administratively brought in. As we have dealt with more OGDPs, we have decided that a more simplified philosophy of simply what are the new or amended operations being proposed will be the new driver of what locations are included in an OGDP. So what does this mean? So next slide, please, Hannah. So going forward, the locations that should be included in OGDP, and I'm speaking primarily to the hearing application and the forms 2B and 2C. The locations to be included in OGDP would be locations that have a Form 2A submitted as part of the OGDP application, whether that's a new, amended, or refile Form 2A. And that's it simply. So this means that locations that would be excluded from an OGDP would be existing locations where Form 2A is not required to be submitted as part of the OGDP. So some examples of these locations where new Form 2A wouldn't be required would be existing locations built or that have valid permits, such as completion support pads. The majority of cases, those are Rule 312 sundries for temporary equipment. These don't rise to the material changes requiring a Form 2A. Another example would be existing locations with wells producing the same drilling unit. In the past, we were requiring these to be administratively brought in. We will no longer be requesting that. And finally, permanent production facility locations where no material changes require a Form 2A. In the past, if these were existing facilities, we were having them be brought in. We will no longer be asking that. However, I do want to drill down here a little bit and say, if there are material changes requiring a Form 2A to be submitted, then that location will have to be included as part of the OGDP. And if you've got questions about, well, how material is this change? Is this equipment change a Form 4 sundry versus a new 2A? I would say please take advantage of those OGDP pre-application meetings with OGLA staff for any of those questions. We would much rather in those pre-application meetings deal with a lot of those questions rather than during the technical review where we're asking for things to be included or excluded when they've already been submitted. Next slide, please, Hannah. So another question that's come up is what wells would be included or excluded? The wells that would be included, and this is primarily on the hearing application text itself, would only be the new, amended, or refile wells that will be drilled as part of the OGDP application. So this would mean wells that would be excluded from an OGDP hearing application would be existing producing wells on the same location, whether they're producing the same DSU as the OGDP or not, or existing permitted but undrilled wells where new Form 2 is not required to be submitted as part of the OGDP. A simplified example of this could be you have 8 wells going north, they're existing, whether they're drilled or have valid Form 2s, and you're amending the location to add an additional 8 wells to go south. In the text of the hearing application, it would be those 8 wells going south that would be the wells that would be part of the OGDP application and not the ones going north. I will make a clear note here. All wells on a location must be totaled on the Form 2A Equipment and Flow Lines tab, just as my colleague Misty went over. And this is regardless of whether they are included or excluded on the hearing application. These 2 bullets in the text on this slide is mainly targeting the hearing application. The 2A always needs to have the full location well count. Next slide, please, Hannah. So the question is then, what are we doing with the excluding? So when you're excluding locations or wells, you will need to identify it, that it is being excluded in the text of the hearing application, or we will ask about it. This is similar in concept to how we ask that existing wells be identified on spacing applications and that the applicant identify the disposition to those wells. We're simply asking for that to be including the locations. Some examples of what this text would look like, you're submitting an OGDP hearing application for a location 1. Location 2 also has minerals producing the same DSU and will be excluded from the OGDP. This is an example where it's producing the same minerals in the same DSU. Location has 6 existing wells producing a separate DSU and will not be subject to this OGDP. You've identified that there are existing wells producing separate lands and minerals and they're not being subject to the OGDP. And then finally, an existing facility location will be utilized for production facilities, but is not being included in this OGDP. So these are examples of we want to have the these other locations or wells identified and explicitly excluded within the text of the hearing application. Next slide, please, Hannah. So let's go through a couple of examples visually what this would look like. So this example 1, this is a simplified example. You have a DSU for 2 sections, a 1280 in the dotted line, and in blue you have 1 new location with 8 new wells. So for this OGDP, you would be requesting 1 new location and 8 new wells. Next slide, please, Hannah. So in this second example, you have a location that already has 4 wells on it. So you're requesting the OGDP for 1 amended location and 4 new wells. In the text of the OGDP application, you would state that that location already has 4 wells, that the location would have a total of 8 wells, but that those 4 existing wells would be excluded. Next slide, please, Hannah. And finally, this is the sort of wells in the same DSU example. So in the western portion, you have the OGDP requesting 1 new location with 4 new wells. And that what you would be excluding would be this other eastern location that has 4 existing wells. You would still identify that it's also producing the same minerals and that it exists, but you would also explicitly state that you are excluding it from the OGDP application. Next slide, please, Hannah. So these are just a couple simplified examples I've gone over. For other questions about the OGLA review of the hearing applications for OGDPs, please contact me. My email is right there. I'm happy to answer any questions prior to the submittal of a hearing application, whether it be over email, a quick call, video call. Really want to try and capture a lot of these questions prior to applications being submitted. In terms of the rollout of this new methodology and review, this will be only for the newly submitted OGDPs. In-process OGDPs and OGDPs that have already undergone the initial OGLA review will be grandfathered in. And I do want to add the disclaimer, the director always will have the discretion to request other locations or wells be brought in if determined as reasonable and necessary to evaluate cumulative impacts or ensure protection of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, or wildlife resources, including correlative rights. I do want to again emphasize, like I said a few slides ago, the importance of those pre-application meetings for the OGDPs. A lot of those questions and clarifications can happen in those meetings, and we really want to encourage folks to take advantage of those. Next slide, please, Hannah. This is just a really quick update on behalf of the hearings unit. The OGDP application template was recently updated and posted to the website. So from our website, you would go hearings, e-filing system, and you can see under the e-filing guide section on that page, the OGDP application template, as well as the date when that was posted. And we are requesting that folks update their templates and start using this new one. Next slide, please, Hannah. Okay, I know there's a lot of text here, so please bear with me. This has been an evolving discussion regarding the use of the unless an exception is granted by the director language, primarily with spacing applications in regards to interwell setback distances. And the reason this all came up is because in the old language, primarily in a single sentence paragraph, you have both the unit boundary setbacks being defined as well as the interwell setbacks being defined, and the single unless an exception is granted by the director tacked on to the end of that full sentence. There's been a couple issues that have been identified that have been brought up by this. First, by having the unit and interwell setbacks in the same sentence with that language, it's implying that the director can grant an exception for wells completed interval to be closer than 150 feet to an offset well, but that's not exactly an exception the director can grant. In Rule 408U, which is the hydraulic fracture statewide setback rule, it states that no portion of a proposed wellbore would have to be treated by hydraulic fracturing would be located with 100 feet of an existing well that also has been or will be hydraulically fractured, unless you have signed written consent of the operator of the encroached upon wellbore. That operator, who is the applicant, would then attach the signed written consents to any Form 2 for the proposed wellbore. So it is the offset wellbore operator providing that consent for the completions within 150 feet of their well. It's not the director granting an exception. So that's been one issue with this language. Next slide, please, Hannah. The second issue is we have received feedback from a few applicants that have raised concern about removing that unless an exception is granted by director language, because the concern that if that language is removed, the exception locations the director can grant under Rule 401C are also being written out of the order. And in order to address both the first issue and this second issue, next slide, please, Hannah, we've proposed the new language here in blue so that you can continue to, in a single sentence, deal with the unit boundary setback, the interwell setback, and then instead of the unless authorized by the director, it's unless authorized by Rule 401C or 408U1 as applicable. We hope that this simplified language can cover all the bases, and we request that this is what's used going forward for the spacing applications. Next slide, please, Hannah. And that's it for me today. As was said earlier, I'll take questions at the end, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Just a moment. Yes, next up, we've got new process introduction, Sabrina Trask, and let me just cue that one up.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Hannah. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, let's just jump in. Next slide, please, Hannah. So some of you, I think many of you are aware that we've been doing a pilot project trying to see how we can improve efficiency and timeliness of OGDP processing, particularly in the completeness process. So we are sort of unofficially today soft rolling out a new process. It will be effective now, but we recognize we probably aren't going to answer everybody's questions today. So I do intend to have another presentation on this topic, possibly at next month's operator meeting. So we're going to roll out a new enhanced completeness process. I'll talk about why are we changing this? What is our current completeness process compared to the new completeness process? I'm going to talk about one and done. How is this new process better? And then a couple of questions that you might have. Next slide, please. So why are we changing our completeness process? The rule allows that OGLA staff should respond within 30 days or make every effort to respond for completeness within 30 days. We've gotten a lot of feedback from industry statewide saying this takes too long because staff is not able to meet the 30 days consistently. Frequently, we return the Form 2A, 2B, 2C to draft. With the OGDPs that were approved last year, we returned the forms to draft an average of 2 times per OGDP. Some OGDPs had forms returned as many as 4 times returned to draft before we could even pass completeness. The average timeline from initial submission of the complete application to passing completeness is 110 days. The chart there are the stats of the approved OGDPs from 2022. You can see a few of them did pass completeness right around that 30-day mark. One of them took us longer than 300 days to pass completeness. I want to make clear that is a combination of us returning the form back to draft multiple times, as well as the time that the applicant had that form in their shop making corrections. In some cases, operators kept those forms in draft for many, many months before resubmitting. So I just want to make sure you understand it's not that staff is ignoring your application for 300 days. Next slide, please. We've also heard from industry that it takes too long for technical and final review. The average from the time of passing completeness to the date of the hearing is 114 days, which means the average time from initial submission to hearing is 222 days. That's about 7 months. We acknowledge that's a long time. Again, it's a shared responsibility, OGLA staff, as well as other units within the agency. And particularly, it's the responsibility of the applicant to make sure that their application is clean and workable. So I think we can do better than 222 days. Next slide, please. Additional feedback that we've heard, inconsistent reviews between OGLA staff members. So one OGLA staff member might pass completeness with a whole bunch of issues to roll over into technical review. Another OGLA staff member might pass completeness after they've identified everything. It is an issue. I acknowledge that. Senior OGLA staff historically has found issues during final review, which is frustrating for operators, frustrating for staff as well. And I think the biggest message that we've heard, or the biggest, loudest feedback that we've heard from industry is that when senior staff finds issues with the application at the last minute, as we are writing the director's recommendation, sometimes those issues are significant enough that we are requiring that the hearing is delayed so that the applicant has time to correct those issues or revise the application enough that we feel comfortable writing a director recommendation and pushing it into hearing. So we've heard your concerns. We acknowledge your concerns. This new process is hopefully will address those concerns. Next slide, please. So 30 days for completeness as described in Rule 303B. Over the last year, as we've really implemented and fine-tuned this process, and with a lot of continued input from industry, we kind of narrowed it down so that the OGLA's completeness review would be only looking for the bare minimum rule requirements. Does it tick the box? We weren't looking at the technical content of plans and attachments, but more sort of, are those plans and attachments there? The problem with this is that a lot of errors and deficiencies were being passed through completeness, which then required a lot of in-depth correction during technical review. Keep in mind, once the Form 2A passes completeness and is moved from upload status to in process status, we cannot return that form to draft. And so it has required a lot of back and forth between the applicant and the lead OGLA, sending attachments via email and having the lead OGLA manually swap out plans and attachments on the Form 2A. It has not been a very efficient process. Next slide, please. So the new enhanced completeness that we're rolling out, it's basically, in a nutshell, the lead OGLA specialist will do a full, complete, comprehensive technical review of the OGDP. This will include the hearing liaison, so Stephen Shores, coordinating the full review of the hearing application. Once that full technical review has been done, the lead OGLA specialist will notify a senior OGLA staff member to do final review. Normally, that final review has been happening as we're writing the director's recommendation in the weeks leading up to the hearing. This new process moves all of that deep diving review, the technical review and the final review, into the completeness portion of the process. So I hope all of you are familiar now with the spreadsheets, the completeness spreadsheets, where the lead OGLA writes out all the notes. Each in the spreadsheet, there's a different tab for each plan and for each attachment on the Form 2A. We've taken that spreadsheet and we've just bulked it up to include not what was just the completeness issues identified, but all of the issues, deficiencies, questions, concerns identified in the full technical review and in the final review will now be included on that spreadsheet. We'll email the spreadsheet to you, push the Form 2A, 2B, 2C, hearing application, whatever needs to go back for corrections, we'll push that back to draft for you. Next slide, please. Per Rule 303B4, the applicant has 90 days to respond. We find that generally applicants respond very quickly, within a day or two, at least, to acknowledge receipt of the spreadsheet. Certainly you have, the faster you make the corrections, when we push those forms back to draft and give you the spreadsheet with all of the issues identified, the faster you make those corrections and resubmit the information to us, the sooner we can continue our review of the application. I do want to caveat, though, that just pushing it back quickly and haphazardly will not benefit you. We are asking operators to be thorough and thoughtful as you make corrections to your OGDP application. You'll have the spreadsheet. It will have everything we've identified listed out, and we encourage you to provide comments or responses in that spreadsheet. If you want to do a line by line, yep, changed that, yep, corrected that, yeah, tick that box. If you want to add comments to say, we disagree with the OGLA's assessment of this and here's why, you have every opportunity to add those comments into the spreadsheet, so that when you do resubmit your application, send us that spreadsheet back. It will help us understand the corrections that you've made based on what we've requested and your response to those requests from the lead OGLA. Next slide, please. So one question that I was anticipating is, well, when we resubmit it, is it going to be another 30, 60, 90 days? Our goal is for the lead OGLA to circle back onto your application within 2 weeks after resubmitting it. I will encourage my staff to review those resubmittals, review your corrections. Fingers crossed, you've answered everything that we've asked. The lead OGLA will attach the spreadsheet to the Form 2A. This will be part of the record. Everybody will be able to see it. The public will be able to see it. They'll be able to see the lead OGLA's due diligence and the work that they've done to identify the issues, and they will be able to see the operator's response. So the operator's due diligence in making those necessary corrections. If everything looks good, the lead OGLA will pass completeness. If there are unresolved issues, two different options. If those issues are non-rule based, so say something like we ask you to tell us, when do you intend to commence operations? Give us the, quarter and the year that you intend to commence operations. That's not a rule-based requirement. It's something that we almost always ask. But if your response is not clear, we might still pass completeness, but we might flag it for further discussion in post-completeness review. We might flag it in the director's recommendation. If any unresolved issues are rule-based, rule requirements, we cannot pass completeness. I'm going to make that very, very clear. If there are unresolved rule requirements, we will not pass completeness. Applicants, again, per 303 before, have 90 days to provide the information that we've requested. If you choose not to provide the information, maybe we need to have a talk about why you don't want to provide the information, or maybe the director will determine that your application cannot be approved. So we really intend this to be a very clear, straightforward dialogue to minimize a lot of back and forth. We're hoping that we can ask in the spreadsheet, you can respond in the spreadsheet, resubmit, we can pass completeness and move on from there. Next slide, please. So once we do pass completeness, the standard process will apply. The notice of hearing will go out per the 500 series rules. The minimum time for that notice is 60 days. We're going to aim for 75 days. There's one efficiency we're making right there. Traditionally, we've been asking for 90 days for the hearing. So we're going to cut that down to 75. Keep in mind we will have some discretion based on the complexity of the OGDP, the complexity of the information in the OGDP, that sort of thing. So generally, we're going to aim for a 75-day hearing notice. Public comment period, as always, is 30 or 45 days, depending on the disproportionately impacted community status. CPW consultation per rule allows for 60 days. I think everybody that's worked with CPW generally would agree that CPW is on the ball with their pre-app consultations. So it would be highly unusual for a CPW consultation to take 60 days. I think generally those are mostly wrapped up within just a couple of weeks at most. CDPHE consultation, 45 to 60 days per rule, depending on, again, the status of disproportionately impacted communities. The lead OGLA will attach any additional information that arises after passing completeness. So if there are public comments received or a CDPHE consultation and the operator would like to provide a response to public comments or a response to CDPHE, by all means, the lead OGLA, send them your response documents and we will attach those to the Form 2A as we have been over the last 2 years. The OGLA staff will then publish the director recommendation. Next slide, please. So I mentioned one and done. This sounds, it's a little casual, maybe, yeah, a little bit casual. I want to describe kind of what I mean by this. The intent with this new process is that the OGLA staff will do one full technical and final review, one review, not a partial completeness review, and then a technical review, and then a final review with 3 different sets of comments coming back to you. We're going to do the entire thing and provide one full comprehensive list of issues or questions at the very beginning. So OGLA staff gets, I don't want to say it like this, but gets one chance to really identify everything that might be wrong with the application. The applicant also gets one chance to make those corrections. That's not to say that we're not going to find something later as something new comes in. And that's not to say that the applicant can't continue to make corrections and refine their application after it passes completeness. But the goal really is to minimize the back and forth that we've all seen over the last year in particular. It also gives the applicant the autonomy and the independence and the responsibility to make their own corrections in web forms. It's your application. We would like you to make those corrections to it. So one and done. I apologize, it does sound a little bit flip, but it's really meant to demonstrate a single review and a single response as much as possible. Next slide, please, Hannah. So you're probably asking, how is this better? Because this sounds stressful. This will streamline and simplify the communication between the applicant and the lead OGLA. This is also going to create some consistency and efficiency in the OGLA review. So consistency meaning in the past, the lead OGLA has had the authority to send the forms back to draft without anyone else reviewing it. We acknowledge there's been some deviations in what is being sent back versus what is being passed through completeness. We want to make some consistency here by having the senior OGLA or an OGLA supervisor conduct final review early on. It will help to ensure that the full suite of information is caught and is adequately described in the spreadsheet. That will create a lot more consistency than what we've seen in the past. It will also create some efficiency in our review because we'll do one review instead of doing a completeness review and then a technical review and then a final review. This is also a better process because it puts more responsibility on the applicant. And I know I am anticipating some of you might be a little uncomfortable with that because in years past, we have fostered. We're not fostering anymore. Everybody's, I think, acutely aware of that. So it does put more responsibility on the applicant to make sure that your application is your application and is not perfected by the OGLA staff. Another way this is beneficial is that the application that passes completeness has been corrected by the operator, by the applicant. So by the time it passes completeness, that's when we post it to the website. That's when it becomes open for public comment. That version of your application is going to be much more close to the application that the commissioners are going to decide. So the way we've been doing it, we pass completeness, sometimes knowing there's a lot of stuff that's going to get fixed in technical review. It's a little bit misleading to the public as they're reviewing those applications during public comment. And so doing it this way, the application has largely been corrected so that they are seeing a corrected version of the application when they review it during public comment. This also minimizes the risk of us finding significant issues very late in the game. This has been a problem in a couple of cases, a significant problem and caused major delays for operators. So by having the final review happen prior to completeness, hopefully that's 2 sets of eyes on your application, you making all of the corrections, resubmitting. It's going to significantly minimize the risk that we're going to find a rule bust item 2 weeks before the hearing. This also adds certainty to the hearing date. If you've gotten all of your corrections made and we haven't identified, if OGLA staff has identified everything and you've made all of those corrections, the hearing date will stand. generally speaking, unless some, catastrophic thing happens and you want to now add 5 more wells to your Form 2A. That's definitely going to change the hearing date. But generally speaking, we're intending that we catch everything early, make those corrections, the hearing date will be met. This also just improves the overall processing time. I think, as one of the earlier slides says, 222 days from initial submission to the hearing. This process will do better than that. Not every single time, of course, but generally I would expect 75 to 100 days for completeness, and then 75 days for the rest of the process, public, to accommodate public comment, CPW, CDPHE consultation. So we're looking at well under 200 days, probably even close to 150, a much better process time-wise than what we've seen over the last year. Next slide, please, Hannah. So a couple of questions. How long will it take to do the full technical and final review? We know we're not going to do it in 30 days. It will depend on the quality of your application, as always, and the complexity of your OGDP. If you have one Form 2A, that's going to go a lot faster than if you have an OGDP with 5 locations and 5 Form 2As. So I want to say we're gonna aim for 60 days, but that is going to be flexible. If you have a variance request, if you have CPW consultations, there's a lot of additional complexities that could be in an OGDP. And so the time it takes OGLA staff to do the full technical and final review during completeness is highly dependent on each OGDP. Question might be, what if I want to add or change something after it passes completeness? Get a hold of your lead OGLA. We are happy to work with you. Keep in mind, though, any significant changes may require renotice per Rule 303C2. And by renotice, that could be as bad as going back to square one and starting over. But we will work with you. Let us know what changes you want to make. Depending on what those changes are, we're happy to work with you on that. And then what if I don't like this new process? I hope you like it. We have been working on a couple of sort of test OGDPs over the last couple of months, and we're getting really positive feedback from those applicants. We're getting really positive feedback from the OGLA staff who have been involved in those pilot projects as well. So I hope you like it. We recognize there will be some ongoing fine tuning. Again, I do want to have another presentation on this topic, maybe to have maybe some interactive Q&A. I think it's a much better process. Next slide, please, Hannah. So what's next? This will be effective starting now. If you have an OGDP that's in completeness with us, reach out to your lead OGLA and discuss with them. Do you want them to switch midstream to this new process if they've already been doing completeness review? Do you want them to finish the traditional completeness review on those OGDPs that are currently in our shop? Just have a discussion with your lead OGLA, talk to them and figure out together what is the best process, either staying in the same process that it was started under or jumping to the new process. I want to be flexible on that. But for new OGDPs coming in, we will be using the new enhanced completeness process. We will also have some formal guidance coming at some point. We will continue to fine tune this new process. I know we're kind of rolling it out, initially now. We want to fine tune it. We want to find additional efficiencies that work better for both the applicants and for staff. And also keep in mind, OGDP pre-application consultations are your friend. They're not just in Weld County anymore. We have them available statewide. So if you're thinking about submitting an OGDP, reach out to Ben Frizzell, our OGLA supervisor, and he will help you set up a pre-application consultation that would also help minimize any issues upon submittal of your OGDP application. I know that was a lot. Sorry, drinking from a fire hose. I think that's the last slide, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Sabrina. This is the end. So we'll start with the questions now. Folks can continue to drop their questions in the comments or in the chat, and I will read those off. The first one is a comment from our environmental manager, Greg Geronimo, and he says, regarding zoom scale on interactive maps, if you manually enter 6001 in the scale box at the right/center of the screen below the visible map window, you will get the optimal zoom on flow lines. Thank you for that, Greg. Folks can make sure to remember that for later. The next question is for Misty. On your scenario 3 with the 5 wells on the pad, if you are plugging 2 older wells on a location and the 2A was approved greater than 3 years ago, is this scenario still valid, or would you need a new OGDP to have an active 2A for the new wells?
Great question. Jessica, I think you may have 2 questions in one here. So the way I'm gonna answer, hopefully will answer your question, but if not, please let me know. For a built location, if there's no expansion of the originally approved disturbed area and there's no addition of well slots, then an OGDP is not required. If the pad will be expanded or additional well slots are being requested, an OGDP and an amended Form 2A are required to add those additional well slots to the location. If an operator plans to plug and abandon wells on the pad, those wells must be plugged and abandoned. So a Form 6 subsequent must be in process or approved before the well slots become available for a new API number. The other part of your question that I'm kind of reading into with the 3 years, once a Form 2A is acted upon, so the location is built, that Form 2A essentially doesn't expire, or in our eyes doesn't expire. So if it was built 3 years ago, the 2A is still active in a sense, but it's not, you would still need to amend the Form 2A. And I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Miss. If the question asker needs further clarification, please just drop that in the chat and we will further clarify. The next question is for Stephen. If you would, please define grandfathered with respect to your discussion on which locations are included / not included in an OGDP hearings application.
Absolutely. By grandfathered, I just mean that the applications that have already passed completeness and or have already had their first OGLA review of the OGDP hearing application completed and uploaded to e-filing will continue to move forward without having this new review stance applied. We will not be retroactively applying this to already noticed OGDP hearing applications. So we're not going to start pulling ones that are well along their way to hearing back in order to start doing these big material changes. We're really only applying this to the new ones coming in.
Great, thank you, Stephen. The next question is for Sabrina. Please address a rule-based issue not passing completeness, specifically that operators do not want to provide their service owner email address on the Form 2A.
And that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. It has been a little bit problematic. There is a rule requirement, I think it's the rule 306C, requires that the director send the notice of director's recommendation to the surface owner electronically. And maybe I'll flag for Scott, that's another one we can add to our list of rule cleanup wish list. So that electronic notice generally is the email generated when we pass a task or approve something on a form. Web forms will send an electronic email notice. I think many of you are familiar with those. That was the intent of the rule, is that when the director's recommendation is posted, we do, flip a switch, pass a task on the Form 2A, and that notice is sent. We've been sending the email notices ourselves via email because we're still lacking some functionality in the web forms, which is I take ownership of that. It is not Chris Eisinger's fault or his team's fault. It's a ball that I dropped 2 years ago and haven't circled back on yet. So to answer your question, Anne, we are required to have that email address. If the surface owner doesn't have an email address, or if they don't want their email address entered on the Form 2A, just provide the email address to us in the spreadsheet, the new enhanced completeness spreadsheet. If they don't have an email address, then we are happy to work something out with you where the operator would then need to act as proxy for the surface owner, receive that electronic notice from the director, and then ensure that that notice gets forwarded timely and accurately to the surface owner. So again, not an elegant solution, but let us know in the spreadsheet what the situation is, and staff will be happy to work with you. Another good idea, again, is if you happen to attend a pre-application consultation and know that this is going to be an issue, you could let us know at that point, and we might be able to find an additional workaround to alleviate the issue.
Thank you, Sabrina. We don't have any further questions at the moment, so I'll just move on to wrap up. Here are the, I've added some extra dates through the end of the year for our operator meetings. They're going to be on the second Tuesday of the month. Ignore that top part, I haven't updated that, sorry about that. And if you need to be added to the operator email list, please email me at this email address right here, and I will be happy to add you to the list. Otherwise, thank you everyone for attending today, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.